All right, attention. Captain to crew. All hands square away to decelerate. Ship's beeper will, as usual, sound 10 times after lights dim. Come on, Doc. DC, bosun.
Aye, aye, sir. DC station.
There are films that entertain, and then there are films that quietly rewrite the rules of what cinema can do. Forbidden Planet, released by MGM in 1956, belongs firmly in the second category. But beyond its groundbreaking sets, its electronic score, and its Shakespearean bones, there is another story hiding in plain sight, the story of the people who brought it to life. The cast of Forbidden Planet was a genuinely fascinating collection of personalities, a classically trained Shakespearean actor who almost turned the film down, a former model who became one of the era's most underrated screen presences, a comedian-turned-dramatic lead who would spend the rest of his life being asked about a robot, and a roster of supporting players whose careers stretched across 5 decades of American entertainment. These are 20 facts about the cast of Forbidden Planet that most fans have never heard. Walter Pidgeon, who played the brilliant and ultimately tragic Dr. Edward Morbius, was by 1956 one of the most respected dramatic actors working in Hollywood. He had earned 2 Academy Award nominations, one for How Green Was My Valley in 1941 and another for Mrs. Miniver in 1942, both of them prestige productions of exactly the kind that defined his image. Science fiction was not a natural home for a man of his stature, and he was genuinely uncertain about whether accepting the role was the right decision for his career. What persuaded him was the script itself. Unlike the B-movie creature features that dominated the genre at the time, the Forbidden Planet screenplay gave him a character of genuine intellectual and emotional complexity. Morbius was not a villain in the conventional sense. He was a scholar undone by his own ambition, a Prospero figure whose unconscious desires had taken on a terrible physical reality. Pidgeon recognized the dramatic weight of that premise and took the role. His authority and restraint gave the film a gravitas it would not otherwise have had. And Frances, who played Altera Morbius, the sheltered young woman raised in isolation on the distant planet of Altair 4, made film history in a way that often goes unremarked. Her costume for the film, designed by Helen Rose, was a short skirt that exposed her legs well above the knee, a design that predated the mainstream fashion miniskirt by nearly a decade. At the time, the costume was considered daring enough to generate commentary, and it contributed significantly to the film's promotional campaign. Frances was not simply a decorative presence, however. She brought a genuine and appealing quality of curiosity and vulnerability to a character who could easily have been passive, and she managed the transition from isolated innocent to young woman discovering the world with real charm. Frances would go on to a long career in television, most notably starring in the detective series Honey West in 1965, for which she received an Emmy nomination. But for many of her fans, Altera remained her most beloved role. Before the world came to know Leslie Nielsen as the deadpan comic genius of Airplane and the Naked Gun films, he was a serious dramatic actor building a career in film and television. His performance as Commander J.J. Adams in Forbidden Planet was no accident of casting. Nielsen immersed himself in preparation for the role, approaching it as a legitimate dramatic challenge rather than a genre exercise. He studied naval command structure and worked to project the particular combination of authority, intelligence, and restrained humanity that the character required. Those who worked with him on the production remembered him as meticulous and professional. The irony of his later career, in which that same straight-faced authority became the engine of comedy, is one of Hollywood's most delicious transformations. Nielsen himself was well aware of it, and he spent decades cheerfully acknowledging that the poker-faced commander he played at the age of 30 became the template for every absurd authority figure he would ever portray. Warren Stevens, who gave a warm and memorable performance as Doc Ostro, the ship's medical officer aboard the C-57D, had served in the United States Army during World War II and later pursued further military service during the Korean War era before fully committing to his acting career. His military background gave him a natural ease with the ensemble dynamics of the film's shipboard setting, and his chemistry with both Nielsen and the rest of the crew felt genuinely lived in. Stevens went on to one of the more quietly prolific careers in American television history, appearing in episodes of shows including The Twilight Zone, Star Trek, and Mission Impossible, among dozens of others. He was exactly the kind of reliable, intelligent character actor that kept Golden Age Hollywood running, the kind whose name the general public rarely remembered, but whose face was immediately familiar to anyone who watched television in the 1960s and 1970s. What many viewers watching in Frances on screen in 1956 did not know was that she had faced a significant personal health challenge in the years leading up to the production. She had undergone surgery to address a tumor that had been discovered on her jaw, a procedure that left her uncertain about whether her career and her physical appearance would survive intact. The experience gave her a perspective on her work and her life that she would carry forward for decades. Frances later spoke openly about this period in her memoirs and in interviews, describing how the experience of genuine vulnerability shaped her approach to acting. There is a quality of openness and emotional honesty in her performance as Altera that her co-stars consistently remarked upon, and those who knew her history understood that it was not simply a product of technique. Richard Anderson appeared in Forbidden Planet as Quinn, one of the crew members of the C-57D, in what was still the early phase of a career that would ultimately span more than 5 decades. He was a dependable and appealing screen presence, and his work on the film brought him to the attention of producers who were actively developing television content for the growing medium. Anderson went on to significant television roles throughout the following decades, most notably appearing in The $6 Million Man and The Bionic Woman in the 1970s, where his character of Oscar Goldman became one of the defining figures of that era of American adventure television. His journey from a supporting role on an MGM soundstage to a recognizable face in nearly every American living room is a testament to the way Forbidden Planet served as a launching pad for the careers of multiple cast members. During production, there was a persistent tension between the way Pidgeon understood his character and what some members of the studio apparatus expected from a science fiction film. The genre's conventions of the era leaned toward heightened performances, characters who reacted to strange phenomena with open shock and theatrical alarm. Pidgeon resisted this consistently. He played Morbius with a kind of cold intellectual containment that was unusual for the genre and that some observers initially found too restrained. His conviction was that Morbius's tragedy was internal and private, that a man of his intelligence and arrogance would not externalize his crumbling emotional state through dramatic outbursts. The finished film proved him correct. The scenes in which Morbius begins to comprehend what he has unleashed are among the most quietly devastating moments in 1950s American cinema precisely because Pidgeon refuses to underline them. According to production documents and later recollections from crew members, there was a point during filming at which MGM executives expressed uncertainty about whether Nielsen's performance had the necessary weight for the lead role. He was still a relatively young actor at the time, and the studio's concern was that audiences accustomed to seeing more established stars in commanding roles might not fully accept him. The discussions did not ultimately lead to any action, and Nielsen completed the film. In hindsight, this moment of doubt is almost comical given what his performance actually delivered: a grounded, credible, and genuinely likable commander whose chemistry with both Francis and the rest of the cast was one of the film's chief pleasures. The executives who doubted him were, as executives often are, entirely wrong. ALS. The romantic subplot between Commander Adams and Altera is one of the film's lighter elements, and it works largely because of the easy, playful energy between Francis and Nielsen. What makes this particularly interesting is that the two actors reportedly had very little time together before filming their scenes, with director Fred M. Wilcox preferring to capture a sense of spontaneity and mutual discovery rather than a polished, rehearsed connection. The strategy paid off. The scenes between them have a freshness that feels genuinely unforced, and Francis's reactions in particular carry an authenticity that more heavily rehearsed work might have smoothed away. Both actors later spoke warmly about working with each other, describing the filming of their scenes as one of the more enjoyable aspects of the production. Marvin Miller provided the voice for Robbie the Robot, giving the character its distinctive measured, courteous, and faintly humorous vocal quality. Miller was a veteran radio actor and announcer with extensive experience in voice work, and his contribution to the character was substantial. Robbie's personality, helpful, gentle, precise, and occasionally capable of something approaching dry wit, was as much a product of Miller's vocal performance as of the mechanical design of the suit itself. Despite this, Miller was not credited in the original theatrical release of the film. This was not unusual for voice performers in the era, but it represented a significant undervaluing of a contribution that proved essential to the character's success. Robbie the Robot without Miller's voice would have been a remarkable piece of engineering. With it, Robbie became something approaching a fully realized personality. Jack Kelly, who appeared in Forbidden Planet as Lieutenant Farman, was at the time of filming in the early stages of what would become a long and successful career in American westerns. He had recently completed work in several Western pictures and was developing the particular combination of good looks, easy charm, and physical confidence that the genre rewarded. His role in Forbidden Planet was something of a detour from that trajectory, though not an unwelcome one. Kelly went on to co-star in Maverick alongside James Garner, the celebrated television western that ran from 1957 to 1962 and established him as one of the recognizable faces of that era of American television. His Forbidden Planet credit became a point of curiosity for science fiction fans who discovered his work through the later Western productions. Despite having 2 Academy Award nominations to his name and a filmography that included some of the most prestigious productions of Hollywood's golden age, Walter Pidgeon was reported in his later years to have spoken of his work in Forbidden Planet with particular warmth and satisfaction. He had recognized something in the material that elevated it above the genre classification it was usually given, and he was proud of having been part of a production that, however slowly, came to be understood as a genuine artistic achievement. For a man who had spent much of his career in respectable prestige pictures, there was perhaps something liberating about a role that operated outside the conventional frameworks of dramatic respectability. Morbius was stranger, more complicated, and ultimately more interesting than many of the characters Pidgeon had been asked to play in the preceding decade. And Frances did not step away from science fiction after Forbidden Planet. She appeared in episodes of The Twilight Zone, contributing to one of the genre's defining television texts of the era, and she maintained a connection to speculative fiction throughout her career that reflected a genuine affinity for the genre rather than a reluctant commercial accommodation to it. She later expressed in interviews that Forbidden Planet had opened something for her. That the experience of working on a production that took its ideas seriously had made her more interested in finding material that operated in that register. She brought the same quality of open, intelligent engagement to her television science fiction work that had made Altera memorable, and genre fans recognized and rewarded that consistency. The Robbie the Robot suit, operated from inside by actor Frankie Darro and voiced separately by Marvin Miller, presented genuine practical challenges for the cast members who had to share scenes with it. The suit was not easy to work around. It was large, visually dominant, and operated by a person who was entirely hidden and working largely blind. The cast members were given minimal preparation for the experience of interacting with what was, in practice, a large and somewhat unpredictable mechanical object rather than a scene partner. Nielsen in particular later recalled the strangeness of delivering dialogue to a piece of equipment and trusting that the finished product would feel like a genuine interaction. The fact that it does, that Robbie feels like a character rather than a prop in his scenes with the human cast, is a testament to how successfully everyone involved adapted to the situation. Among the surviving cast members, Warren Stevens was notably consistent and enthusiastic in his willingness to discuss Forbidden Planet in interviews and at fan events throughout the 1980s and 1990s. While some cast members were ambivalent about the film's increasing science fiction cult status, Stevens embraced it. He attended science fiction conventions, participated in anniversary screenings, and spoke with genuine affection about the production and the people involved in it. His advocacy was important in keeping the film's story alive during the decades before its formal cultural recognition, and his warmth and accessibility made him a beloved figure among the communities of fans who had grown up with the film. Before moving to Hollywood, Leslie Nielsen had trained and performed in Canadian theater and television, building a body of stage work that gave him the technical grounding his film career would later draw on. His theatrical background was part of what made him attractive to MGM's casting team for the role of Commander Adams. The studio wanted an actor who could project command and intelligence without tipping into melodrama, and Nielsen's stage training had given him exactly that kind of disciplined control. His Canadian origins were not widely publicized during his Hollywood years, as the studio system of the era had a strong preference for presenting its stars as essentially American regardless of their actual backgrounds. Nielsen was born in Regina, Saskatchewan, and the journey from that origin point to commanding a starship on an MGM soundstage is one of the more improbable trajectories in the history of the entertainment industry. The visibility that and Frances gained from Forbidden Planet, combined with her obvious talent and striking screen presence, brought her to the attention of producers working on some of the more significant dramatic projects of the late 1950s and early 1960s. She was considered for multiple lead roles in major productions during this period, and while not all of them materialized in the way her advocates hoped, the experience established her as a serious candidate for leading lady status rather than simply a genre fixture. She worked steadily and with distinction for the following 3 decades, appearing in films and television series that covered an unusually wide range of genres and tones. Her career after Forbidden Planet demonstrated that the film had been a genuine showcase for her abilities rather than simply a lucky accident of casting. Perhaps one of the more surprising revelations that emerged from cast interviews conducted in later decades was how few of the principal actors were aware during production that the screenplay was drawing heavily from Shakespeare's The Tempest. The script's Shakespearean structure had been embedded deeply enough, and transformed thoroughly enough into science fiction idiom, that the connections were not immediately apparent to the people working with the material. Walter Pidgeon, with his classical background, may have been an exception. There are suggestions in some accounts that he recognized the Prospero parallel, but several other cast members expressed genuine surprise when scholars and critics began drawing attention to the film's literary antecedents. For them, it had simply been a well-written and unusual science fiction script. The discovery of its deeper architecture gave them a retrospective pride in the work that many of them found moving. The story of Leslie Nielsen calling the Star Trek production office to compliment the show has been told before, but its significance for Nielsen himself is worth dwelling on. When he placed that call in 1966, reaching production secretary D.C. Fontana on a morning when Gene Roddenberry was not yet in the office, Nielsen was in the middle of a career that was still actively searching for its footing. Forbidden Planet had not made him a star in the conventional sense. He was working steadily but without the kind of defining role that crystallizes a career. The moment of connecting with Star Trek, of recognizing in that new show the lineage of something he had been part of a decade earlier, gave him a sense of his own place in the history of the genre. He had helped create a template that had proven durable enough to inspire one of television's most enduring franchises. That recognition, even if the wider public did not share it, mattered to him. When you map the careers of the cast of Forbidden Planet forward in time, what emerges is something remarkable. Walter Pidgeon's gravitas established the template for the morally complex scientist figure that science fiction returned to again and again in the decades that followed. And Francis's Altera created a model for the capable, curious female protagonist that the genre was painfully slow to build on but ultimately could not abandon. Leslie Nielsen's Commander Adams gave Star Trek's creators their clearest vision of what a starship commander could look and sound like.